I am starting with the pericope that's, it's verse 11, love one another. This is the message you've heard since the beginning. We should love one another and not act as Cain did. Now, I know something about Cain that you may not have ever been taught. When it says in Hebrews that Cain's, Abel's sacrifice was, in most English translations, better. But it doesn't, the word is not better. It says was more.
More acceptable?
It does not say. It just said was more. And actually, it probably means nothing more than it was better. But it is a strange thing. And if you read very many commentaries or statements on it, people will speculate about what. I think it is simply that Abel's sacrifice was what God had asked for, and Cain's was not. The more would be acceptable. And I don't know, nobody, I can give you another one of those guidelines that when I said if anybody's theory of Antichrist requires just one Antichrist, they're not biblical. If anybody tells you they know exactly why Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's wasn't, they're not biblical. Because I have studied that from every angle that I can find, and I have not ever been satisfied with the people's explanations. Just say this: the sacrifice that Abel gave was what God wanted.
And was there clear instruction about what he wanted?
No.
That's
that's the reason. Nobody knows.
Could it be that one offering was made from the heart and the other offering was made out of a feeling of necessity?
Or obligation.
Or obligation?
I don't see that there.
I don't see that.
I don't not see it either.
Okay.
All I'm saying is there's some things that we're not going to get an answer for, because the only source of that answer is the Bible, and the Bible doesn't tell us. That's like my friend James Thompson from ACU said. He said, you can't ask that question. He was teaching the Bible class at Westgate in Beaumont, and somebody said, well, why not? I just did. He said, well, you can ask it, but you won't get it answered. Don't spend your time. What does Paul say? Don't spend your time arguing.
Speculation?
What?
Is it idle speculation? Idle speculation?
Yes, what James was saying is, don't spend your time over the meaning of words. Don't, you can argue about the meaning of words that are not clearly defined, but remember, you're only looking at the backside of your own eyeballs. You're not looking at the text of the Bible. I see that some of you thought that was a funny metaphor, and I intended for it to be. Enough falderall, lest I fall into my own condemnation. This is the message you've heard since the beginning. We should love one another and not act as Cain did, who was of the evil one. Now, the evil one, we would be tendency to call that Satan. But Satan is a concept and not a person. The person is the devil. The person is the great serpent, the red dragon, using language from the book of Revelation. And the devil and the Satan are not identical terms. I'm not going to get into that until we start studying Job, but I just want you to realize that. He said, why did he murder his brother? Because his actions were evil and those of his brother were right with God. That's what I'm trying to say. All we know about it is that God had indicated prior to that situation what he wanted. And we can reduce this statement to Abel gave the kind, the amount, or source of sacrifice that God had indicated he accepted. So more acceptable is a kind of redundant term, but that's the best we can do. Since it is not something we have to worry about today, because sacrifices of the blood of bulls and goats are no longer efficacious.
And saying that it's more acceptable, does that mean that perhaps Cain's was acceptable, but Abel's was just more acceptable? Or does it mean that God totally rejected his...
The text does not say.
Doesn't lend anything to that?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Don't say more than the Bible does.
Sure.
I think that idea of more acceptable is interesting because I always look back at that offering that Cain gave and said God, through Moses, stipulated that kind of sacrifice eventually.
Yes.
It wasn't the main sacrifice, but it's the sacrifice of bread and stuff. It was grain sacrifice.
Yes, that's a possible speculation, but don't try to prove it.
Well, you brought up the fact that it just says more.
Uh-huh.
And that more acceptable I think fits into that category of being more acceptable because, and God didn't reject Cain's offering. He just said, if you want, what your brother got, just do the same thing.
Okay. I don't know why we human beings are made like we are, but we spend more time on what the Bible doesn't say.
Curious minds want to know.
Okay. Fellow believers, don't ever be surprised if the fallen world hates you. Have you ever been hated for being a Christian? That you know of?
Not hated, but rejected.
Rejected. Well, hatred is a word that lends itself to exaggeration. What I'm trying to say, as somebody said in a seminar course I had, but it just means that to love less. And it was a commentary on the passage where it says,
Where he hated Esau, is that what you're?
oh yes, where
God,
Jacob
in
had
Hebrews,
what?
where God said, where the writer of Hebrews says that God hated Esau but loved
It's
Jacob.
it's the present perfect tense that God has loved Abel more than he did Cain, the descendants. That it does not say why, and so we're not going to say why.
Are these one of the things we need to put on our list when we get to heaven to find out?
I can't even say that, Jesse, because I hope to be occupied with more important activities and worship and service to God.
I've always kind of joked about having a list of things I need to ask when I get there, you know?
Yeah.
Yet it won't be important.
But here's the thing. Like Jesus told the Sadducees that came to him, said, you do err, not knowing the nature of the resurrected people, nor the scriptures. And that's enough error. We won't go there.
I've been told that the word hate is not equivalent to the word that's used when Jesus says, if you don't love me more than your parents, you know, it's kind of like you have to love me and hate your parents type thing. And that whole thing about Abel and Jacob that he hated, it's that same word. It doesn't mean what we think it means.
It doesn't mean violent rejection of.
Right.
It just means you have to love me more.
Right.
And we're back to that more. And that's far as we can go.
Right.
Okay. We have come to know that we have migrated from the realm of death to the realm of life. Now, I like that idea. You take somebody, go back to the 1840s when some of our Irish ancestors were starving to death because of potato blight, and they migrated. That is, they weren't just going to take a trip to the United States. They were going into a realm. And that's the best metaphor. I won't say that. It's a very good metaphor. That I have migrated with the power of faith in Christ from one realm, the realm of death, into the realm of life. Just as he was raised from the dead, Jesus was permanently, don't call me on the philosophy of that because it's hard to talk about permanency in an eternally existing creature, but it is a realm. And that's what I've been trying to get you to see is you can be up and down. You can be more satisfied, less satisfied, and all that, but you will still be in the realm of life. And it's a whole lot better to be in the realm of life than it is in the realm of death. Because in the book of Revelation, you have the devil who is thrown into the pit. and destroyed as one of the last acts of God before the end of time. And you and your friend Edward Fudge really has studied that passage and idea. You ought to read some of his material. If you ever have a chance to see the movie Helen, Mr. Fudge, mine and I got to see a first run showing of that.
Premiere.
A premiere, yes, a premiere, lights,
Carl, let me ask you a question.
okay.
If the devil is going to be thrown and destroyed just before the end of time, does the devil know that?
I don't know, you'd have to ask him.
Probably.
Well, the reason I'm asking that is that if I were the devil and I knew that I was going to be destroyed before the end of time, I would do everything I could to extend the time.
He may be doing that.
Well, he's going in the wrong direction, isn't he, with respect to how the world is operating these days?
Well, here's the thing. We don't know enough, and I've been studying for Teach Joe. When you get back behind the scenes, as it were, we don't know very much that's going on, but we'll hold that to Joe. All right.
When we talk about the moving from one realm to the other, I'm reminded of the passage that says we're citizens of,
Oh, yes. Our politumia, it says in Philippians, our residence, our permanent residence is not of this world. It's a heavenly, like the people saying, I lay up treasures in the heavenly places. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I get off on the.
You finished with the death and the realm of life.
Yes, because we are loving our fellow believers. Now, we know that we have done that because we love our fellow members. See, these Gnostics did not love their fellow believers. They wanted to be superior to them. They said, I am better than you. I am more intelligent than you. Even if that is true, it ain't love.
Right.
I've been exposed in my lifetime to some of the smartest people around. I preached one time in Brookline, Massachusetts, to the person who was head of the John Kennedy School of Public Research, or public whatever they call it, at Harvard. I mean, that's...
Public service.
Huh?
It could be public service.
It wasn't, though. It's not. That's not what it's called. But anyway, and I didn't feel either superior or inferior, but they were there. And by the way, because his wife and Julia Childs were friends, I got to have tea with Julia and her friend. You want to touch me? It's amazing if you move around over the country, the people that you can have contact with. What is it? 6 degrees of separation is the most that you can have, but neither there, here nor there. The person who is not living in the realm of love remains in the realm of death. This is a test. And nobody can apply the test to you except you and God. I was talking about divorce and remarriage with a fellow one time. And he says, oh, you're too easy on them. Well, they could just fake that. I said, you think they can deceive God? And he said, no, but how would the elder? They don't have to know.
Yeah.
You
It's
do.
not for us to judge.
What?
It is not for us to judge.
Exactly right. And I had a person who got up out of class and left over that because they wanted to be able to judge. And when I said, no, you can't do that and remain in
In the right realm.
the right realm. Okay, good. And you know that everyone who habitually hates their fellow believers does not have the life of the age to come remaining in them. Now that's a little awkward, but the word ionos, which is sometimes in the King James tradition translated eternal, is not length of life. It is kind of life. Now that makes a difference. I've heard arguments all my life about, well, if you have eternal life, you can't lose it. Well, that's true, because you'll be dead and buried before you get to there. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about if you place other things and other people of higher importance than you do Christ, you're a murderer. That's effectively what he says here. It's the thing that we talked about last week when we talked about the sin of Adam being different from the sin of Eve, and that if you are not living, if you deliberately choose not to serve God, Christ, then you're equivalent of a murderer, because you have chosen to follow your own choices. I hear some preachers, some Bible class teachers, and some Christians who seem to thrive on their superiority. What John would say here is that a sense of superiority is awfully thin gruel for spirituality. It doesn't sustain spiritual life very well.
Maybe we never like to go to the extreme of what the results of what we're saying or doing, calling ourselves a murderer. We don't think of, well, I want to kill them, but I don't like them. You know, in God's eyes, in a sense, if you have any ill will toward your brother, the extension of that is murder.
Yeah. What did Jesus say about if you're going to worship God and have your offering to the altar and suddenly realize that your brother has something against you?
Or you have against them.
You have to go and make it right with them?
Whenever you finish your statement.
What?
I have a question whenever you finish your statement.
Okay, I just finished it.
I was interested in your use of the word habitually. Every person who habitually hates their fellow believers is a murderer. Habitually.
Okay, what does that mean to you, if anything? I mean, I need to know where you're coming from.
I don't want to influence your thinking. Continuously.
Well, that's what I mean, is make a habit of it. That you don't have to choose every time.
Okay, I got it.
Don't have to be
Okay.
perfect.
What?
Don't have to be perfect about always doing the right thing, because we err and we can do the wrong thing, but our habit is not to do the wrong thing. Our habit is to try to do the good thing.
How about a pattern of life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Very good. Yes. You can tell, although I don't need to know, I can be around someone over a period of time. And if I wanted to, which I don't see it as my job, I can make a pretty good guess as to whether they are habitually trying to serve God or trying not to serve God. But why?
But then you're judging.
What?
Then you're judging. You are judging.
Judging, yes. And that's the thing. It's amazing. I had a fellow that actually got up out of a class and left because we reduced the study, and how do I want to say that? We got down to the point where the only person that needed to know whether somebody was a Christian or not is the person who was printing the church directory. Think of that.
When we exude a spirit of love, people are attracted to that. Whereas if you have a spirit of hatefulness, people reject that and won't come. So if we want to attract people so that they will be listening, it's that spirit of love. I'm reminded when I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, we occasionally went to Virginia Beach, and several times, right down on the main street, about this most busy crosswalk, there would be one or two guys out there holding Bibles in the air and just screaming in the most hateful voice, "Repent! You know, turn away from your sins." Just on, and everybody's, "Get away from me," you know. And that kind of attitude, I'm sure, attracted no one to Christ.
Except those are the same feather.
But
You know, the word murder can, I think, be linked to character assassination. There are those who seem to thrive on engaging in
yes,
character assassination and scapegoating. And unfortunately, it seems that there's some business organizations that end up sort of being built on a platform of everybody climbing over the bodies of other people. I can remember way back in the 60s working for a Fortune 500 company where it was kind of a standard fare that the expectation was that everybody was in competition with everyone else. And character assassination, scapegoating was kind of the norm. If something happens, it's got to be his fault or her fault or whatever. So that's a scary thought, I think, to think about it. When you say something about somebody, think about it real hard.
yes. Anyone over here? Sometimes I get attracted to my left, and I don't know why. It may be because this fellow right here, but I hope y'all are coming along, and thanks for asking your question, Lindy. Getting back to this, though. Hates their fellow believers a murderer, and you know that everyone who habitually hates their fellow believers does not have the life of the age to come remaining in them. They won't make it to the new heaven and the new earth. And that idea of the two ages is one of the richest, and you will not understand the teaching of the Bible on the final disposition of creation if you don't have a firm hold on the idea of the age to come.
I thought you were going to say instead of disposition, dispensation.
No, I am not a dispensationalist. Let's go on now. Does not have the life of the age to come remaining in them. This is how we have come to know what loving means. Now, this is how. Does that refer to what has just been said?
Yes, no, what's coming?
What?
What's coming next?
I think so. It's what's coming next. This is how we have come to know what loving means. His example is that he has laid down his life on our behalf. This means that we're morally obligated to lay down our lives on behalf of our fellow members. And I had to get something in there. God doesn't ever command us to die for our fellow man. Now, he may put us in a position where if we are consistent with our profession, we will lose our lives. I think about soldiers. Very seldom, even in the most vicious of warfare, does a commanding officer order his troops to die. But there are exceptions to that. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them rode the 600. There are few people, few situations where you're commanded. I don't know what I would do if I were thoroughly convinced that it was a message from God. I would spend long and prayerful. But I hope to hear the change in surety. I hope I would answer Private Prince, reporting for duty. Butch.
Does the meaning of lay down our lives on behalf of our fellow believers necessarily have to be literal, or could it be that when you look at the following sentence, that it helps explain that it's putting others' interest above our own at times? Is that?
Just a minute, and then I'll come back to you.
I was thinking in terms of this idea as being very similar to the one where Paul is telling wives to submit to their husbands. but that the husband, which we always want to talk about the submission of the wife, but on the other hand, it's husbands are supposed to be willing to lay down their life for their wife.
Okay, that's a
We
good,
don't seem to equal out that.
that's a very good parallel usage. And he's talking about the Ephesians 5 passage where he says, husbands, be ready to lay down your life. You can lay down your life not to lose physical life, but to sacrifice your interests. And that is covered here. And because, look at the example he's going to use, just 20. This is how we have come to know what loving means. His example is that he has laid down his life on our behalf. This means we are morally obligated to lay down our lives on behalf of our fellow believers. And then he gives an example. Whoever possesses the material goods that sustain life. Now, what are material goods that sustain life? Food, clothing.
Roof. And shelter.
Shelter, yeah. If we have these material goods and sees any of their fellow believers in need and has no compassion for the needy one, how can the love of God be said to remain in them? And the answer, that's a rhetorical question, and the answer is it cannot. That's one thing that I am very concerned about, and I'm not engaging in politics in the regular sense of the word, but how little compassion plays in public life in our nation or in the world today. People just let the devil take the hindermost.
But was it any different in the Roman Empire?
No.
Or in most kingdoms of this world?
No, I'm just saying the present world is no different. Okay.
Charles, what about these instances, especially in the Old Testament, where the Jews were told by God to go to war against this group of people?
Okay. I don't think there's any comparison because but he still isn't, I'm not commanded to hate it can still be a situation. I think about something I saw on television over the Memorial Day weekend. And this young man and young woman were reading the words of soldiers who had been in the Near East. And they laid down their lives, even though they were still living. They said, I would do it again. I'm in a difficult situation here, trying not to bring politics into or even sociology. But I do need to let you know to be highly suspicious of any religious or political leader who does not show compassion to the people who are hungry and ill-clad, people who are indifferent to the needs of the poor. That is not what God desires for anyone to be.
I would say that extends to self-defense.
Yes, yes.
Brother Charles, I struggled through that very concept. I was in the Pentagon when it was hit on 9/11. And the immediate reaction is, well, we know we're at war, but at first we weren't sure who with. And the temptation would be to get revenge. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. That verse kept coming through my mind, and I stayed up till the wee hours of the morning trying to get a grip on that. And I finally came up with the concept. We invest in our military certain authorities, and the same way with the police force, to use deadly force. But for the Christian, it's got to be the right attitude, and it's not one of vengeance, but it's protection of the innocents. We're commissioned to protect the innocent, and so that put my mind at ease, and I wasn't going to help plan the retaliation of this for revenge, but it was going to be to make certain that we're protecting innocent lives in that regard. So.
Yes. I think that God gives most Christians a group of people for which they are morally responsible. Take Mina and I. I'm going to let you know that if somebody physically attacked Mina, that I would use every means in my power, from fists to baseball bats,
A gun?
spears.
How about a gun?
Yeah, well, if I had one.
Yeah.
And I'm not taking a pro-gun, anti-gun. I'm just saying I have that's the reason I use the word moral responsibility to take care of the well-being. Now, not only of Mina, but just any fellow believer.
Charles, I like the way that James addresses this in James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accomplished by actions. That is not accompanied by actions is dead.
Is that, where was that, James?
James 2,
Yes.
14 through 17.
Yes, that's.
It's kind of like a parallel to this same
And
idea.
remember, Paul said if a widow has kinfolks that she's not taking care of, she's worse than an unbeliever. We have these relationships of love, and people who have a right to my defense, such as it is, right? In the physical condition in which I find myself, I would have to be protected. If Mina would probably protect me better than I could protect her. But
We'd probably both pass out.
You know, there's been an untold number of words written in words spoken about the tension between the notion of salvation by grace as opposed to works. One of the things that I'm struck with is the concept that Andy Blakesley, our president of Here's Life Africa, came up with for a banquet theme, which we've used now for several years. We call it Grace Works. Think about it, a little play on words, but is it not true?
It is.
The ultimate teaching is that, yes, the recipient of grace does work.
And Butch, I think of the passage in Titus 3, where it says, grace has appeared, teaching us, and the idea is that grace demands response on our part. And our time is,
Shows you got one more sentence in that thought. Could we?
Yeah, keep going.
okay. Little children, let us not love with words or statements alone, but with genuine actions.
Summed it up.
Yes, that does sum it up. And that's what the whole lesson today is summed up by that. We need to work our love. I could reverse that and say, love our work. But it is, what is the key? Which one of those words? Little children, what? Let us love. The second great command is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I always get a laugh at that when I say, for the purposes of that second greatest commandment, who is our closest neighbor?
People in the family. People in our family.
Yes. Mine is my closest neighbor. That may sound strange, but I honor her by loving her. All right. And turn the class over to Lindia.